Thank you very much. So could you respond to the grant versus contract?
In the UUM program, we did use the contracting model, and what we did there is 50% was available upfront to them once they essentially sent us a representation agreement through a sampling process. We basically took the immigrant registration number, ran that back to Office of Refugee Resettlement. Once we confirmed that, we could continue paying invoices. I think we're imagining a similar process here, but not necessarily an identical one. The 50-50 with the legal and the long term, we thought made some sense. However, we could imagine, again, as I said earlier, we'll have an inclusionary discussion process for how we're going to do this. We could have different payment points. It could be one-third, one-third. It could be some loaded more upfront, some later. I think it's a dialogue we'll continue to have, but we were thinking contract rather than grant, but certainly some flexibility there.
Okay, that's good to know. Any other questions? All right, thank you. We'll hold that item open for future action. Move on to item 2, the May revised caseload and estimates update.
I can do a brief summary of certainly the caseload areas in my programs. The overall adjustments are summarized in your agenda.
Yes.
For CalWorks, what our May revision is presenting is that the decline is a little bit faster than we had projected back in January, 2.6% rather than 1.9%. That's mostly attributable to reduced applications, probably recovering economy. It's not surprising. It's actually not all that much of a change in the grand scheme of the way the CalWorks program has moved over the years. Subcomponents within that, child care and employment services, those caseloads have been actually growing, even though the overall caseload has been declining. Again, we think this is due to greater utilization and engagement that's been going on as we've been recovering from years ago when we reduced the single allocation as a budget solution. But through the re-engagement process, we're now seeing more people engaged and more people taking up those services. I believe the LAO has some slightly different thoughts. They do get a slightly later look at the actual data, and if they want to present their thoughts next.
LAO.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me, Ryan Woolsey with the Legislative Analyst's Office. As we usually do, we've taken a close look at the caseload estimates behind the Governor's May revision to attempt to identify whether we think they represent what actually will take place and help the legislature make its budgetary decisions. We agree that the overall caseload is declining, and we think that the May revision estimate for the overall number of families in the program, that's a reasonable estimate. We also agree that there has been, in some cases, significant increases in the employment services and child care, more so in employment services, and we believe that is primarily connected to the phase out of those short-term exemptions that were widely applicable to a large portion of the caseload. We think that we are entering into a somewhat uncertain period where it's possible that the employment services caseload may level off or possibly even begin to decline, only because the phase out of those exemptions has ceased. And as we've noted, the overall number of families and therefore adults in the program will be declining. It's difficult to say at this time. We don't feel like we have enough data to recommend a really significant reduction in employment services relative to what is assumed in the May revision, but just looking at actuals for the current year, of which there's only 3 months remaining, we believe the legislature could make a modest $8 million reduction in the single allocation for employment services to adjust for what we see there, and then just assume that the growth that is assumed in the May revision continues from that lower base. We similarly have looked at the child care caseload, and while we acknowledge that there are policy changes going on in the program that are still being implemented, most significantly the online assessment that's rolling out later this year. We believe the estimates may be overstated, and we believe the legislature could similarly reduce the single allocation for child care by roughly $20 million. and not reduce spending on a per case basis.
And the online assessment, meaning the 24-month front-end assessment, what assessment?
The online assessment tool is an online standardized tool that will be used with all new welfare to work participants when they begin participating in the program. It's been in design for quite some time now and will be rolled out over the next few months across counties. It may contribute to an increased child care caseload by better identifying needs.
So it's not the 24-month assessment, or it is?
Well, it's an overall assessment that is used at the front of that 24-month process.
Right.
But
Okay, I think we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, I think we're talking, yes,
Okay.
we are.
All
And
right.
again, I think that would be one caution. I do respect the LAO, that they got a later look at the data. On the other hand, with OCAT, and literally we are training on OCAT today
Right.
as we speak.
Right.
In Sonora, I believe there's a training today.
Got it.
It just might, caution against too big of a budget reduction based on just a few months of actuals.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I might, just one more comment that, of course, these funds are given to counties as a part of a flexible single allocation.
Yes.
So the legislature has the option of either freeing up these funds for other priorities or leaving them in the budget, allowing counties to provide an incrementally higher level of service, including funding things in family stabilization, which does not have a services funding item in the budget.
And given the county's concerned about the level of their single allocation, I would assume that would be their desire. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Finance? Nothing. Any questions from members? Any public comment? Speaking of counties.
Speaking of counties, Frank Mecca, Executive Director of CWDA. It is our desire, as the chair speculated. We appreciate trying to find the right caseload numbers in a period of uncertainty is difficult. We'd caution, as DSS has, against taking funds without knowing that they're really available, because we wouldn't want to short services. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Mike Carroll with Western Center on Law and Poverty. I have a slightly different perspective on this. We're not choosing between LAO and DSS's numbers on this. I think that the committee will come to a wise decision. But to the degree to which there are savings to be found in the CalWORKS budget this year, notably the caseload decline, our first priority for those would be to reinvest those into CalWORKS grants, raising grant levels for families, and we think the committee ought to be looking at any opportunities where there are savings. Again, the caseload determinations will be made by DSS, CWDA, LAO, and yourself, but to the degree to which we do find savings, we would encourage you to try to place those towards the grant levels, which are still in deep poverty.
Thank you, sir, very much, and we'll hold this item open. Moving on to Department of Social Services, CalWORKS, issue number 703, temporary assistance for needy families, transfer to the California Student Aid Commission. We're on page 16 of the agenda.
This is a technical adjustment to reflect the greater balance of TANF funds available for transfer to the Student Aid Commission. It's based on the latest estimates of available funds, and it occurs each year. One reason for the increase is the very next issue we're going to talk about, that we shifted certain sanction cases, long-term sanction cases. We shifted them to non-MOE general fund dollars. That frees up TANF dollars that can then in turn be used to make it a budget neutral shift through the transfer to the SAC. We see this as a technical adjustment.
LAO? Nothing. Finance? Any public comment on this item? We'll hold this item open. Number 2, child support pass-through for long-term sanction cases.
As we've discussed before, the state under the federal welfare reform faces work participation rate requirements. We need to reach 50%. As we've discussed before, very, very close to that number. One step that we took this March administratively was to take long-term sanction cases, about 14,500 of them. Our counties work diligently. Essentially, we moved them to a different aid code, a different funding source. We put them to non-MOE general fund. This has the effect of pulling them out of the denominator and raising our WPR by about 1.6%. And we're so close that every little bit matters. Avoiding those penalties is perhaps my greatest concern in this. It's that and CalFresh participation are probably the two things I worry about the most.
You have said that to committee repeatedly, sir. Yes.
All right. Basically, what our trailer bill proposal does is when we shift the clients to off of federal TANF funding and into non-MOE, they're essentially former TANF from the federal perspective. And federal law requires that those families be passed along their child support directly rather than recouped to the state.
Right.
So essentially, all our trailer bill does is align the state practice with the federal law. It is identical to what we did a year ago when we moved out the safety net cases and did the same thing. And we had trailer bill discussions then with your staff and with advocates, I believe. All this trailer bill does is say, and add those treat those sanction cases the same way.
Got it. Any questions from committee members? Any comment from LAO? And any public comment? We will hold this item open as well. Moving on to item 3, previous drug felony reporting requirement.
Again, this is also, again, technical cleanup. A year ago, the legislature repealed the ban on drug felons receiving CalWORKs. However, we forgot to repeal a mid-period reporting requirement about drug felonies. We've already implemented the law. We're not requiring that mid-period report, but we always want the law to align to our actual practice.
Yes,
so
we
asking
do.
for the cleanup.
Any public comment on that? We got a thumbs up.
Got a thumbs.
Any comment from LAO, finance, or members? We'll hold the item open. Item 4, TBL 613 and budget bill language regarding housing support program and extension of liquidation period.
With the housing support program, we've implemented that this year, working with 20 counties. And essentially, our trailer bill is largely cleanup in nature with one substantive change, although it's a substantive change that's consistent with the practice we're following. And that practice is, we believed if a client received a housing stabilization program, had say a rent subsidy or whatever that might be lasting 3 or 6, and it depended on the county. But if they managed with that stability to get a job and then income off, we thought it was we didn't want to pull the rug out from under their housing.
Right.
So essentially, we have been advising counties, not in writing, but advising them that indeed they can continue that. Again, we'd like the statute to reflect what we're actually doing. And there's some other, I would say, mostly cosmetic changes to the language about how we're moving the funding around. In terms of the reason for the language about liquidation, we wanted to maximize the funding available in the budget year. That will be $20 million. So we are proposing language that would allow the counties to expend in the current year, charge to the current year, things that happen in the current year, but for which the bills don't come until the budget year. That will maximize the future money. The governor's budget maintains the program at $20 million.
So in that context, can you tell us how, answer the second question on page 18, how much of last year's funds have been encumbered?
In CalWORKs and the way that single allocation, the way these kinds of things work, they're sort of technically all encumbered. They were all made available to the county, but on the way the accounting actually works, they've expended just over $5 million as of March of that 20. But what I would point out, and I believe colleagues from CWDA will be presenting something, the way that expenditure rolled out, it was very late loaded. It was much bigger in February and March than it was in January, and much bigger then than it was in the months in the fall. So we're on a steep ramp up. So I don't think that the fact that it was only $5 million through the quarter is at all indicative. We're moving towards potentially. Actually, I think CWDA has a chart for you.
Here it is. Yes, I see the sharp incline. Why don't you come forward, Mr. Mecca, and tell us about the chart, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We prepared this chart for you today that actually shows actual data through April. So you can see the program started in earnest around December or so. And through April, we have actual data on 3 elements. The number of families referred is the blue, the cumulative families approved is the red, and then the families that have been permanently housed in the green. The difference between the blue and the red would be families who actually were not eligible. They were referred, they dropped out, they got a job, or they weren't eligible. The families are approved are families that are actively getting services now. Credit repair, we're negotiating with landlords, et cetera. And then the green line is actually families that are in permanent housing and are getting some type of assistance with that permanent housing. And so the dotted lines, we projected based on the average sort of month-over-month increase since the beginning of the program, smoothing out for anomalously high or low months. What it basically shows is that if you look at the green line, we project that by June, we're looking at about 3,300 families that would be in permanent housing. That's actually 300 more than we assumed when the program started. So we're absolutely sort of in the ballpark with what we originally envisioned for the 20 counties. In fact, some counties are probably going to have to close down intake, before the end of the year, before they know what their allocation will be for the following year, which they knew getting into it. Like that would be part of the program. The other thing I'd point out is that this is essentially a 6 to 9 month snapshot for those 20 counties. For those 20 counties to annualize this level of service for this number of clients, it would require more funding. So just to reiterate, CWDA and Housing California, on whose behalf I'm also speaking today since our lobbyist, John Bowders, is in another legislative matter, we've asked the committee for $30 million above the 20, $50 million total. We would envision that the department that's done a terrific job running this program would, on a competitive basis, award those funds either to some of the original 20 counties who would be able to make a case for expanding their programs, and to allow new counties who were not able to participate in the first round. So we're very excited about the program. We're very confident that it's going to be fully utilized in this year, and very confident that we can utilize the full $30 million that we're requesting next year. And you've already heard from clients every day who are being helped by this program.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Madam Chair, and Mr. Mecca's a bit taller than me. Mike Carroll with the Western Center on Law and Poverty, and we too stand in support of this augmentation. We believe this is a very important program, cutting edge as it is, and very beneficial to our clients.
Thank you very much. I know I jumped to public comment. LAO or Finance have any comment? And members? Okay, we'll hold this item open. Thank you. Moving on to issue number 5, the 24-month clock in the Welfare to Work program.
Essentially, the reason for change here is data refinement. In January, the governor's budget tied out to old data having to do with the 48-month time clock, and those numbers suggested a very large number of families might be impacted and savings of as much as $6 million. During that budget hearings, when we reported to you in March, we explained that we had moved to 24-month clock data, and those numbers were quite a bit lower, suggesting more in the range of 4,000 cases. Actually, I have the wrong, that's not the right number, but less cases, substantially less. What we've done here in May is taken an even closer look at that data and looked at which clocks are really running consecutively. Have we properly accounted for exemptions? Have we properly accounted for sanctions, which stop clocks? Have we properly accounted for all of that information? And based on that, our current estimate is that we will be at 1,500 cases come the end of June of 16. 1,500 cases will be having a grant reduction due to this policy. That's quite a bit lower than what we presented to you. Based on all that, essentially the savings from this proposal have been adjusted downward from the January budget from $6 million to closer to $1 million, a loss of about $5 million. Again, we are pleased with the work that the counties have done in implementing the program. It's a number that we're pleased to see. It's a lower number.
That makes 2 of us. LAO, Finance, public comment.
Madam Chair, Mike Carroll with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. We're pleased to hear the new numbers. We haven't actually seen this new analysis from the department. We look forward to getting that. But based on the presentation that we've heard from the department today, it's good that we're getting less people potentially getting a grant reduction, and that there will be less, savings from that those grant reductions. However, my understanding of this is that when we look forward into the following budget year, those numbers again begin to escalate. They go up again. While again, they're somewhat lower than the projections we were seeing a year ago, These are real families getting real reductions. We would, again, urge the legislature to take this time, since these numbers are so relatively small, $1 million in savings, 1,500 families, that we take this time to just take a pause and make sure and look at this program before we do this harm to those 1,500 families and the other families that will occur in the 16-17 budget year, to redesign this program so we do not get such an extraordinary sanction rate for those who end up in the TANF program. And again, we are grateful if the numbers are lower, but we also think that actually makes it easier for you to take an action now to suspend the transfer to the TANF clock, make sure that we don't do harm to families, pushing more families into deeper poverty, at the same time that this committee and this legislature are looking at ways to get people out of deeper poverty. So we would again call for a suspension of this in a work group to sit down with the department, the counties, and other stakeholders, the legislature, and figure out ways to avoid that harm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll hold this item open. Let's move on to Child Welfare Services. The first item, thank you very much to the panel. Case record reviews. We're on page 20 of the agenda.
Thanks for the opportunity to be here again. Pete Chervenka, Program Deputy Director at the Department of Social Services. I will briefly talk through these, happy to answer any questions, and apologize if it comes over a little short. On the first item, the May revision requests approximately $3 million general fund across two budget items to increase the level of county staffing provided to comply with federal continuous quality improvement case review requirements. The governor's budget had included roughly that same amount of money, but based on experience with several counties and an analysis of additional federal clarification on what's actually required, we believe that the additional funding is justified for this purpose. It'll fund approximately 155 social workers at the county level. These are federal non-optional mandates that we need to comply with in terms of ensuring the quality of our child welfare case practice in California.
Public comment? Questions from members? We'll hold this item open, sir. Let's move on to Child Welfare Training Program.
Okay. Thank you. Again, here, the universities that run the regional training academies for social workers and the organizing entity that coordinates that training have for years foregone their indirect costs associated with administering those programs on behalf of the state. They've indicated that due to fiscal pressure, they're no longer able to do that. And the request before you at the May revision is for about $2.33 million, only $474 of which is general fund, for the purpose of providing a 10% indirect cost rate to those UC San Diego, Fresno State, and Berkeley to provide this training. The alternative to providing this funding would have been to reduce the training programs for social workers. We didn't view that as an acceptable option given everything being pursued in the child welfare arena this year.
10%, I think, is less than the university's typical indirect costs.
That's correct.
Based on my experience. So can you tell us what they're counting as indirect costs for this contract?
This request does not fully fund their indirect costs.
Okay, I'm clear about that. So,
Yeah.
so what types of indirect costs are incurred by the university that this 10% will cover?
So this would be the things you would typically think of in indirect cost in terms of, say, building rent, phones for staff benefits,
Okay.
those kinds of things.
And so they've just said that they'll give us a cut rate, if you will.
That's correct.
Okay. LAO or finance, any public comment? Questions from members? Hold the item open. Item 3, Strengthening Families Act.
In the current, on the topic of commercially sexually exploited children, the current year budget includes a $5 million general fund includes 5 million general fund, for the purpose of assisting counties to develop protocols for how to address youth who present with that condition, as well as for training to recognize it and the beginnings of how to address that issue. In the agreement last year in the budget, it was agreed that the 15-16 budget would include $14 million general fund to begin to provide services as well as additional training on the topic. Subsequent, though, to enactment of last year's or the current year budget, in November of 2014, a federal law passed that mandates a statewide CSEC program. In the interim, since governor's budget, we've been doing an analysis of what overlapping requirements there may be. There's gone some back and forth there. We understand that the County Welfare Directors Association has raised concerns with our analysis of what those overlaps are and how we're proposing to adjust funding. We have a discussion scheduled with them to better understand that and see what we might come to tomorrow morning. So we hope to bring more to the committee there. But the 14 million remains in the 15-16 budget proposal in the May revision, but it's allocated slightly differently, I think, than what some were expecting.
With that, Mr. Mecca, can we hear from you on your concerns regarding the overlap or lack thereof?
Frank Mecca from CWDA. We interpreted the May revision proposal as diverting some of the money that you appropriated or that you agreed to appropriate for services for new federal activities that were not originally contemplated when our original state 855 and CSEC program was put into place. We're happy to talk to the department and the administration tomorrow to see if we could sort of resolve our different ways of looking at the overlap. But if we're correct, then we really are sort of diverting some resources that we would hope to go to services for things like additional reporting requirements in the federal law that really, it was never the intent of us to fund with the original 14 million.
Got it. Thank you. And LAO or Finance, any comments on this? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mecca. We'll hold this item open.
On the next item, Madam Chair, the administration is proposing 100,000 general fund and some matching federal funds to support a contract with the University of California, Berkeley, as your agenda states, for matching pharmacy claims data with our foster youth data for purposes of federal reporting. This is, although we're doing a significant amount of data matching on this topic, this particular reporting mandate is best facilitated at the Berkeley site where they have the capacity to do this. So this is a request to comply with that federal reporting obligation.
LAO or Finance, any public comment? Any questions, members? This is an issue that we've got a package of bills going to the legislature focused on, so I understand this is one component
This
of
is
kind of
one
the
very
overall.
small component of it. The governor's budget had lots of money in it as well for other topics.
Right.
Other activities on the topic.
Got it. Thank you. We'll hold that item open. Item 5, extension of liquidation period for unaccompanied minors funding.
As the committee heard from Mr. Bland and your public testifiers on the UUM cases, they can often take some time for their ultimate resolution, and so this language merely seeks a reappropriation and extension of the encumbrance period to June 2021, because some of these cases could potentially take 5 or 6 years. So we're asking the committees not for new money on this one, but to reappropriate the money in the current year budget and make it available for a much longer period of time in order to ensure that that funding is available at the completion of those cases.
LAO or Finance? Any public comment and that will be taking action on this item? Seeing none, any questions from members?
Move to approve.
Thank you. So we approve and adopt placeholder budget bill language on a 3-0 recommendation. Item number 6, intensive treatment foster care rate extension.
And this item, Madam Chair, was a trailer bill oversight at governor's budget. We actually had funded this rate at governor's budget to continue it and failed to acknowledge that the statute expires on June 30 of 2015. So we're simply here requesting that this ITFC rate be extended another 18 months to January 1 of 2017. so that it doesn't land on a July 1 of a year and provide some additional continuity here. This is an important treatment option for youth who otherwise may end up in a group home. And so we respectfully ask for your approval of this piece of trailer bill language.
Leo? Any public comment? Colleagues? We'll hold this item open. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think
Thank you very much, and we're going to move into the last two items on the agenda for today. I didn't get ahead of myself. No, yes, we are. Department of Social Services, IHSS Services. Good.
And I think Eileen Carroll, our Deputy
Exactly.
Director for Adult Programs, is joining me here. But very briefly, as described in your agenda here, what do I want to say about this? There's a bunch of caseload adjustments, and obviously in the current fiscal year, we were not paying overtime costs, so those monies were saved. I think you're familiar from the caseload discussion that's occurred. The May revision includes significant current year and budget year caseload increase adjustments, in part due to governor's budget underestimation, as well as other caseload dynamics. I don't want to bore you with detail unless you would like that detail.
Why don't you go ahead and present on the General Fund Loan Authority for the IHSS program, and since we're going to hold them open, we can take them both together, if that's okay.
Certainly. And on this one, because of the coordinated care initiative and the 7 counties and roughly 50% of the caseload here, the funding behind this program is really complex. In a nutshell, the department fronts all of the general fund every month to cut a paycheck. Then we claim federal reimbursement from DHCS for the federal portion of that, but some of what we get is a holdback from managed care's capitated rate under the CCI, and then when we get the federal reimbursement, we actually have to cut checks back anyway. As this gets really complicated, the cash flow timing here means that in the last month or two of the fiscal year, we actually don't have enough general fund dollars in our appropriation to make the cash payments out the door until we receive that reimbursement back to us. So this is just loan authority. It's not a budgetary expenditure, but simply enables us to have the cash behind the paychecks.
Got it. That's an important thing to have. Leo, on either item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jenny Bella with the Legislative Analyst's Office. On the issue of the in-home supportive services caseload, we've requested some backup information from the department, are continuing to look at it, and we'll advise you if we spot anything that we think is worth talking about. On the issue of the Fair Labor Standards Act, you're faced with several elements of uncertainty here. The first being we're not sure when the federal courts will ultimately issue their decision,
Right.
what that decision will be, and if there will be further appeals.
Right.
Secondly, if they do decide that states need to go forward with implementing Fair Labor Standards Act new rules on overtime, it's not clear how much lead-in time they'll give us or how long it'll take us to get our systems up and running. So the administration has decided to deal with that uncertainty and that risk by building in a full year of costs to support paying for overtime for IHSS providers. The legislature could decide to deal with that risk differently. Clearly, there are trade-offs by providing a full year of funding for it in the budget year. It means you have less money freed up for other priorities. So those are the types of trade-offs and things you'll have to be thinking about.
Thank you very much for that summary. Finance? Any questions from members on those final two items on IHSS? Any public comment? I thought you were going to get up. You just reached and put your stuff away. Sorry about that.
She's with us.
Oh, got you. We'll hold these two items open until our closeout hearing. Thank you all for your sticking with us
Thanks very much.
to the late hour. Colleagues, any other final comments or questions?
Thanks to you.
I know Senator Stone wants to make some apology to me for not asking to serve on committee with me. I'm sure that's what's in his heart. Thank you all. Sub 3 stands adjourned until Thursday. Thank you.